welcome to Co-Parenting Confessions. I am your host, Alicia Price. And before we get started with anything, a few housekeeping moments. Please like and subscribe so that you can learn more about Co-Parenting Confessions, learn about my journey, and have a little bit of support as you are navigating this tough and oftentimes very difficult space of co-parenting. On Co-Parenting Confessions, we love to make sure that you know that you are not alone in what co-parenting is, and we like to normalize this conversation and change the narrative a little bit. So stick and stay, like and subscribe, because we are here to support you on your co-parenting journey. So today on Co-Parenting Confessions, I'm excited because we are talking about echoism and echoist. And if you don't know what that is, you will want to stay, because I am willing to bet that a lot of our mothers who are co-parenting can relate to this topic and had no idea. And I'm excited because my guest, Lynn Stratdee, who is a psychodynamic therapist and an echoist herself, is here with me today to unpack this not often talked about conversation and topic. And I found her on TikTok, so I'm thrilled to be making connections in the social media world. So without further ado, Lynn, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so thrilled to have you.
Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you have an amazing background. I love that you come to this topic having actually calling yourself an echoist, right?
Yeah.
A large part of the work that I do is co-parenting, and I have this platform because I'm a co-parent. And so I talk about my own life experiences and what brought me to this. Can you tell us a little bit about why are you an echoist and why are you helping to inform in this field?
Sure. So I found out about echoism during my degree. I was doing a degree in psychodynamic therapy, and we were asked to come up with a topic to do a research presentation. And so I was sort of scrabbling around looking for things that I was interested in that I could talk about. And one of the things that I was really interested in was my own relationship history. And I thought it's interesting to find out about something that's actually going to help me if I'm going to be sort of making a presentation for my degree.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I have a history of is really, really unhealthy relationships, romantic relationships with men, but also a career of instability, but often linked to quite narcissistic bosses and environments. So narcissism had always been like a real area of interest for me, and I was fascinated by it. But I didn't want to do a presentation on narcissism, so I thought it'd be great if I could find something that describes what I've been going through. And I started to dig into it, and I discovered a fabulous book by a woman called Donna Christina Savory that talks about echoism as a kind of counterpart really to narcissism, and that really kind of got me down the rabbit hole. And as soon as I read Donna's book, which is very theoretical and isn't really a sort of layman's book, and then Craig Malkin's book called Rethinking Narcissism, which also talks about echoism, I began to see the picture in my mind of what might be going on for me in these intimate relationships. But once I could see that there was something going on with me, it then helped me to understand all the career stuff that had gone wrong previously, because I was just choosing the same types of environment over and over again. Although I didn't feel at the time I was choosing. I felt like these things are just kind of happening. You know, they just keep happening and things keep going wrong, and I couldn't work it out. But reading that book, preparing the presentation, and learning all about it really kind of has been the beginning of an incredible journey, because I've learned so much about myself. And what I have learned really is that echoism, you can think of it in a couple of ways. It's a sort of personality trait at its sort of mildest form. It's a way of being more agreeable and submissive. You can think of echoism as a way of putting other people at the front, to be polite, agreeable, cooperative. You know, echoism, society requires echoism. Like, we need it. But at its sort of pathological sort of level, you can end up so withdrawn from your own life that you're kind of unconsciously attracted to will do that for you. And in my case, I don't have a narcissistic family, but I had some relational trauma, some separation trauma when I moved very far away from my parents at a really important time. And I kind of sort of abandoned myself really at that time. I wouldn't have called it that, but I really experienced quite a deep personal trauma, which kind of shaped the rest of my life. That's really how I would argue that I kind of got into an echoistic position, and having started that, I just kept on going with it.
I love that you share your personal journey with this, because it helps people to understand like they're not alone in this space, and that it's okay to have a terminology for what you're experiencing when there's this kind of repetition in relationship. And I want to back up a bit and just make sure that our audience knows the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is because a large part of the time when you have co-parents that are not getting along well, one person is going to be labeling or calling the other person a narcissist. You will see videos everywhere on YouTube, on TikTok, where everybody, my co-parent is a narcissist. And it's like people have gone into this space of, being very comfortable labeling their co-parent as a narcissist. And it's almost a pass or an excuse to not co-parent, to not be cooperative with a person, because they show up in such a way that you can now label them a narcissist or they're narcissistic, and you can throw your hands up and bow out, right? And so I noticed that this, label is tied to co-parenting so much that I've had a tendency to move away from it. And to tell people, like, okay, if there is narcissistic behavior or tendencies, let's focus really on what's happening for you, what your triggers are, and how you operate in that space, rather than focusing on labeling the other person, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I saw your work, I was like, hey, here's a way that you're really able to take accountability and ownership for your experience in a narcissistic dance, if you will, and if this keeps happening for you. So I want to talk with you about women who say that they habitually are dating men who are narcissists. This is actually how I came to learn who you were. I posted a video on TikTok, and I referenced a podcast that I listened to where the host talked about having dated 4 men who were narcissistic. And, just kind of went on to talking about having been in this spiral of dating men that were narcissistic. And now she has a son, and she's raising her son to be the man that she would have wanted. And it was just a big red flag to me to hear that. And so it took me to this space of, I'm going to talk about this, woman who's dated, 4 different narcissists, and where's her accountability in that? And I went so far as to say, and I could be wrong, I'm okay with being corrected. I went so far as to say, well, sis, if you've dated 4 men who are narcissists, are you not a narcissist? Do you not have some narcissistic tendencies? And someone said, whoa, wait a minute. She could be an echoist. And so then I was like, let's find out more about this. So if you could kind of speak to that, like, that pattern of dating people who are narcissists, and how does the echoism show up in that?
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting there is when you mentioned her feelings about her son.
Yes.
So echoistic people are people, often women, but not always, who are very, very uncomfortable with any sense of idealization, right? So they're not comfortable with being idealized, sometimes because they weren't idealized when they were small. They didn't experience being made to feel like they were the most important and special and wonderful person. And there's a lot of people with that wound. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of people walking around who could say, I don't think I've ever felt that way. Yeah. But an echoistic person will have kind of taken that to the next level and kind of just decided, I'm just not ever really going to try to be idealized, but I'm going to be attracted to people who are very, very, very comfortable being the big cheese, the big noise. So and you don't even really have to think about it in terms of whether you are an echoist or not. If someone's uncomfortable taking up space and ever really being validated themselves, often they will be drawn to somebody who is extremely comfortable with that, unaware that, of course, what they're doing is vicariously experiencing the idealization of the other person, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like, he's comfortable being the big cheese and I'm not, but I really want to stand next to someone that I can feel ideal about. And it's worrying when it then goes on to the children, because then, of course, the children don't just have a short phase of being idealized. They then become the parent's special person. And we know what kind of people that kind of treatment creates in children. It's actually kind of going to breed sort of,
and it could breed a narcissist. It really can breed a narcissist. And I like to talk about this because most women don't really understand that a lot of men who have narcissistic, tendencies and, operate in that way, much of it has been groomed by their mothers. And that, constant kind of lifting them up and that doting over them and, making them, to be in such a way that being self-centered is okay. Right. Yeah. So this is so
classic
good.
Case of the mother projecting all of her unmet idealizing needs onto the child. And then the child is not able to be themselves. They have to be this fake person, and an echoistic person takes the reverse approach and just decides, okay, I don't need to be that. But they haven't given up on their connection to idealizing or being idealized. They're just going to do it sort of vicariously through someone else.
Yes, this is so good. What I want women to understand, especially single mothers who feel wounded by the men who have not shown up for them or who have not lived up to what they wanted to see happen in their family dynamic, is that when you pour all of that unmet emotion and those wounds are not dealt with, and you pour all of that into your children in this way that you're thinking, I am being the best parent and mother that I could possibly be, that you're breeding and building people that sometimes are not emotionally intelligent and aware of themselves in the most positive ways, because you're not dealing sometimes with what you are feeling, with those wounds, and overcompensating in the way you pour into your children.
100%. And I think that, if anything, is the single biggest reason for my page, which is that you're right. The term narcissist is just a slur now. It's an insult. It's a word that gets thrown out at people as if, they're either mythologized to be some sort of, arch hero, I don't know what the term is, but to be some sort of superhero villain type, in such a dramatic way, or it's just, you are absolutely worthless. And the term itself has become it's just meaningless, I think, in the kind of general public space. And so one of the reasons that I did my page was because any amount of time that someone spends assessing someone else's psychology is wasted time. I did it myself. There are so many of us spend years looking at what the other person is doing. Look at what he's up to. Look at why is he doing that? All these questions around why is somebody doing it? Having to understand, the deep psychology of why did he do this or that? What does that teach the person on the receiving end about themselves?
Right.
Absolutely nothing. But it's a great way of avoiding difficult feelings. I'm not trying to blame anyone. I think there's a very good reason why because narcissistic relationships are incredibly painful.
Yes.
Incredibly painful. Abusive relationships are always excruciating, and abuse is never acceptable. But all I mean is, when someone's coming out of that, any time that's spent after you've had the heartbreak assessing someone else's psychology, especially when there's children, it all just ends up with this kind of othering, very black and white, thinking they're all bad, I'm all good, which in itself is actually very narcissistic. Right. That's a really unhealthy way to think. It's a very very infantile way to think. No
Mm-hmm.
one is all bad or all good.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you hit
Mhm.
the nail on the head. I see this all the time in my work, in coaching co-parents, working with single parents. Many times people come in and they're thinking, I would be able to co-parent if you could fix the other person. Let me tell you what the other person has done that has ruined our family dynamic, and would rather sit in that space than to focus on what either they need to do to move forward or what perhaps they did that also added, to the demise of the relationship or the family dynamic. Um, Being able to take accountability and ownership for our own behaviors is so powerful. And I will say, one of the things that I think many men would, probably round of applause somewhere in here, is that a lot of men would say women don't typically say they're wrong. Women don't typically want to own up to, their side in why a relationship didn't work. And so being able to be in that space and say, you know what, I have done some things. Um, Labeling you just as a narcissist doesn't serve us, right? But to own my role in things is important.
Yeah, oh, sorry. I don't know if
Yeah.
you're going to ask me a question there, but that's an interesting point. But those women, to me, don't sound like echoists. So I think the difference would be that usually an echoistic woman or man
Mm-hmm.
would be more inclined to accept responsibility, whether or not something is their fault, to placate or pacify or sustain the relationship with an idealized figure. Even when they're not necessarily together, I think there's still that dynamic of if someone's really echoistic, they have a deep feeling that there's something bad inside of them. There's something bad inside, and therefore if I'm with this other person, I cannot have to think about that. And they're much more inclined to take responsibility than to say it's all your fault. In fact, that's not particularly echoistic as a way of handling conflict. If you think about it in terms of trauma response, it's a fawn response. Echoism is really a massive freeze and fawn. It's just how can I make myself as sort of small and trouble-free as possible. But that in itself can be very damaging, because if a child watches a parent not piping up, not saying, this is not okay, this is the line, and we're going to maintain the line for the best, having calm, centered boundaries. If a child sees the non-action, as well as the negative action, that's incredibly damaging. And I have a strong belief that an echoistic parent who's doing nothing, even though they're frightened, don't get me wrong, I understand it's often fear driven. The child doesn't know that. The child only knows that I'm not seeing anyone doing anything here. No one's doing anything. So that's how I see that.
Yeah, that's good. And thank you for that, because that is a great light bulb for me. So echoist is really a person who is kind of willing to just be up under the wing of a person who has that, kind of boisterous, bravado, speaks out, is the center of attention, and they can just kind of fall under them. As you describe this, I feel like I know someone very close to me who is an echoist. And correct me if I'm wrong, I also feel like what it is if I can make you happy, if I can make you look good for others, that makes me happy. Is that is that another kind of characteristic?
I think yes, in broadest terms, yes. I think if I can make you happy, but I think it's more fundamental than that. It's kind of like I'll just be what you need me to be. What do you need me to be? What do you need? If you need me to be this kind of a person, I'll be this. If you need that, I'll be that. It might be that I'll just please you, but I think people pleasing sounds so kind of like a little bit of a habit that you get into. But actually, it's about kind of not knowing who you are, not knowing who you would be if that person wasn't there, because who would you be if they weren't there? You'd have to find out. And a lot of echoistic people are terrified of the fact that they don't know. They don't know. and they don't want to know because it's scary.
Yeah.
I see an echoist in a co-parenting situation as being more likely to be inconsistent with boundaries and the breakup
Yep.
or the whatever, because
Perfect.
they're more likely to give in, having said, no, these are the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Pressure is applied, emotional pressure or psychological pressure.
Yeah.
The echoist is more likely to do damage by breaking their own boundaries and going against what they agreed to please the idealized other person.
That's good. That is really good. Thank you for breaking that down, because it's extremely important in co-parenting dynamics to know your non-negotiables, to have clear boundaries so that you're able to grow into what a new relationship will be. But if you're operating in this echoist space, you're willing to, if pickup times change, or if, bedtimes change, or we agreed you would, introduce, a new relationship to me before it got too serious, but now you didn't. And I'm just going to roll with the punches, so to speak. And where you're continuing to, not stand up for what is important to you, for what feels good for you, so that you're able to build some stability. Instead, you just kind of acquiesce to whatever the other person is doing or wants to do.
Yeah,
that's good.
100%.
I found some signs of echoism. And so I want to read them because I want people, as they're listening, to see if they find themselves in this. And you, for sure, let me know after if we hit the nail on the head or if there's something that's missing.
Sure.
So we have an echoist would typically compliments make them uncomfortable, or attention makes them uneasy. And even when it's a positive attention, that it's kind of a hard thing for them. And then also it's better to work behind the scenes for an echoist rather than be in the spotlight. And let's see here. They may have missed out on opportunities because they were uncomfortable nominating themselves or promoting their skills. Also, they don't like to be talking about themselves. So that's a no-no. I think that's a really clear one. And then I feel uneasy when I'm the focus of attention. So as an echoist, not being able, again, that spotlight space. And then also, if they find it hard to enjoy compliments, they might be an echoist. And so with this list of 7, it would be really looking at each of these areas and looking at on a scale of 1 to 7, right? And thinking about, where do I land there? And, 7 being strongly, I'm really, really strong in this space, and 1, I disagree, or, not so much. But does that fit, Lynn, when we think about how people might determine if they're an echoist or fit in this space?
I think that list, I would say, touches on the more obvious or the more commonly known signs, which is why I think, the stuff, the literature that's available online, will talk about what you've got there. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about attention, fear of being looked at, fear of compliments. But I would say that there's a kind of deeper and more difficult aspect, because those things are not easy to handle, but they're not massively problematic. If someone doesn't want attention, then they would stay away from attention. The problem with echoism, as I see it, is it's a very shame-based problem where the person feels really uncomfortable in their own skin, and there is a real self-neglect around echoism. So it's actually, I feel, about not really having a clue what your own needs are. So where I feel people go wrong understanding echoism is they'll say, you just need to set boundaries. If you're dealing with a really echoistic person and you say to them, right, let's set some boundaries, that echoistic person's going to say, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't mind. It's fine. There's nothing to set boundaries around, because the echoistic person isn't invested enough in their own self. They just don't care enough about themselves to do the eating that's right for them, the other habits, the gym, whatever it is, the lifestyle that healthy adults do to care for and nurture themselves, an echoistic person will often completely neglect those because they just don't have enough investment in themselves. They're just all about investing the energy in someone else. And it's actually investing the energy in the other person that gives the echoist the energy. If you take away the other person, most echoistic people are very flat. They're just kind of flat.
Yeah. Wow. This is so, yes, it does. This is so intriguing to me because again, in my work with, co-parents, you oftentimes hear, and I can't help but to keep thinking about the single mother who feels like, she's gotten the short end of the stick, so to speak, and maybe not being the echoist so much to the father, but then doing it when it comes to their children. You know what I mean? And so it's like, now I'm nothing without them. I really don't care for myself. I don't care. I don't need to look good. I don't need to shop for me. Everything is really about my children. I show up at every event, at every game. It becomes my identity to be this person for my kids.
You've absolutely hit on something there. And I think this is something that's quite unpleasant to think about because no one wants to talk about this, but echoistic people will actually kind of unconsciously recruit people into narcissistic roles who are not otherwise particularly narcissistic. None of this is deliberate. People aren't trying to create these situations, but it's just the ways that we relate with each other. So if I don't know what I need and I really don't have any sense of my own wants and likes and desires, but you do, you're going to make life a lot easier for me, because if I hang out with you, we don't have to think about it. We can just do what you want to do. Whereas you might ordinarily not be like that. I might put you in a position where you're taking the lead, whether you really want to or not.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Like that just was like, because the other thing it makes me then think about is when you're a single mother and you have multiple children and your eldest child is the one that you're leaning on the most, or they're now stepping into this space of having to be decisive, having to set boundaries, having to care for their siblings because their echoist parent has now recruited them to take on that role when they're not able to do that.
And the echoist will be unconsciously saying to the child, who would you like me to be?
Yep.
Who would you like me to be? Now, no child wants to tell their parent who they should be.
Yep.
The child wants a parent who knows who they are. And it's like, I've got it. It's under control. You're safe. I'm dealing with it. You are safe. You don't have to worry about me. We're all about you. And of course, none of these things are spoken. But if a child feels that their parent is looking to them for guidance of who should I be, that's a really scary place
to be.
For a child to be.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Because children need us to be decisive. They need us to create structure. And when we're deferring to them, right, and, pouring a lot of our emotional needs into what our children are able to do for us or how they show up for us, wow, that's a lot of weight to put on a child.
It really is. Yeah. And I think also that a child's development should be about the child, about the personality of the parent. The child can't possibly develop its own core strength if the focus is on what the parent needs. It's just not possible.
Yeah. What does a person who identifies with being an echoist do to start to move past that space, right? Like if they are saying, okay, I identify with these characteristics, this makes sense to me, but I don't know how to undo it. What happens?
I think that in all honesty, and there's an important connection here with ADHD. So I don't know if you're aware, but one of the things that's become very obvious on my page, which I didn't know when I started it, is that people who have ADHD will most often identify with the stuff on echoism. Echoistic people who didn't know that they had ADHD, who are now thinking, actually, I identify with all this stuff on echoism. I'm going to go and find out if I've got ADHD. There seems to be quite a lot of that going on. So I'm just going to put that out there, because if someone's saying, how do I get help? What do I do? I would definitely look at neurodivergence as a thing. I just think that's worthwhile doing, because if there's, medical help that can be available to people, they should do that. But obviously, the first thing that an echoistic person's going to want to do is look at their relationships, because if they are truly echoistic, it won't just be their boyfriend or their husband or their ex-husband that's narcissistic in their life. They will have lots of narcissistic people in their life. They may well have quite a wider family issue around that way of relating, like their mother, their father, their siblings, their friends. It's probably going to go deeper than just their co-parent, whoever the co-parent is. Therapy is, I would say that I'm a therapist, but therapy is an absolute, I think incredibly, incredibly important. But I think the next most important thing is to really, really sort of dig deep into how aware are you of yourself, your own needs, who you are as a person, your identity. When was the last time that you really kind of were in touch with anything that felt authentically about you? And for many people, that's going to be quite a blank page. And rather than denying that it's a blank page and just pretending there isn't a blank page, we're all good, to really get honest about, do you know what, there's nothing on this page that really is about me being a fully fledged adult. And starting to fill that page in. Which is difficult.
It is. And also, then what would we say when someone is in relationship with a person who shows up this way? If we're thinking, yes, as an echoist, you should start to look at the relationships that you have. And I 100% agree with you that when you start to figure out for yourself how you're showing up in relationships, a large part of that has to be looking at your past, because your past absolutely informs the way you show up in relationships. And when I say past, I absolutely mean how you grew up and what those relationships were that you saw, played out, or what you didn't see happening, absolutely informs how you show up. But when you come to this space as an echoist and you start to look at and examine your relationships, what happens to the people who are actually in relationship with them? Are there some characteristics or things that you've seen happen where a person is in relationship with an echoist and it just feels, I would assume, really drained, or they might even feel really like I'm a terrible person, that I'm making this person feel that they have to constantly care for me or everything is about me. Do you see that happen often?
Well, I mean, I don't really, I suppose from my point of view, it's always as the point of view as the echoist or as the therapist, if that makes sense. So I understand what my clients are going through. And I can say that from the point of view of working with echoistic people, there's always a feeling, and this would therefore be the same with friendships, that echoists seem to need a lot from you. And that's not a negative thing. I don't mean that they're sort of siphoning the energy out of you. It's almost like there's such a fear of taking up any space that they're kind of looking to you. So as a friend, I would imagine that a friend's going to feel like they're offering a lot of guidance and a lot of ideas or suggestions or, support and creativity or plans, or maybe doing the bulk of the planning. And you know what I mean? Doing the thinking stuff that the echoistic person's probably going to let them do. And in that respect, if you're wanting to help an echoistic person, it's just to start to redress the balance and say, this is a team thing.
Good point.
We need to start together.
Yes, because as you're talking, I'm realizing that there are echoists in my life. And so that's what makes
surprising. I mean, there are narcissists all over the place.
Right.
They have echoists everywhere.
Yeah. And what made me ask that question is because I feel like if I'm labeling this correctly, those that are echoists in my life make me feel like they're draining me, because it is a constant, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? I don't care. I don't mind. It's
I
like,
don't mind.
yeah,
I
it's
don't
as
mind.
long as you're happy. And so for me, a person who feels like I'm constantly planning, I'm constantly, being the brains of the operation, so to speak, it becomes exhausting. And
Yeah, and I sorry.
yeah,
I think the sad fact is, and this isn't research data, this is
yeah,
just, my thoughts, that the sad fact is that if a non-echoistic person stopped doing those things and said, you know what, I'm not doing any more planning. I've had enough. It's your turn. I'm not doing it. And decided just to drop it, um, and wait for the echoistic person to then come towards them and do the running. I have a feeling that the echoistic person won't come towards
oh,
you and
they
do the
won't. I
running.
don't think they would.
That
Yep,
relationship will fail.
yep,
And then of course that's when it gets sort of, there's a concern then that, oh well, they're just a narcissist, they don't care. And that's a significant difference. An echoistic
yes,
person, and I do want people to hear this, echoistic people are terrified, and I mean terrified, that
mm-hmm.
they're narcissists. They're so frightened of being big that they are genuinely frightened of being narcissists. In fact, being frightened of being a narcissist is one of the key indicators that you're
Yep,
thinking about echoism, that we're looking at echoism. But one of the things that often happens is that an echoist will not follow up on the ending of a friendship, not because they don't care, but because there just is not the internal energy.
mm-hmm.
There's just nothing in the tank. There's
Yep,
nothing in the tank, but it's not a lack of care. And that's why you could easily think, well, yeah, but I was always just a nothing to
yep,
them. And that's the difference.
mm-hmm.
That's the difference. You were not a nothing. You
Yeah.
were not a nothing.
When you said the thing about an echoist is losing that relationship, or, it deferring to like, okay, now the ball is in your court, you do everything, and they're terrified of that. um this light bulb just went off. I mean, I know so many people that would be that way, and if I weren't in tune with them enough, um cared about them enough, loved them, respect them, I then would not understand that the last thing in the world that they would want is for me to not be there.
Yeah.
That would just be horrible.
Can I
Um,
ask you a question?
yes, yes, please.
You find, if you can think of that one friend,
Mm-hmm.
just one of those friends, do you find that actually they are lovely company because they don't ever take advantage of you? Like you never feel projected onto or pushed around or
Yep,
kind of, it's not a
100%.
manipulative energy.
Yep.
I feel it's not a, but it's just super passive.
Mm-hmm.
Super passive.
Mm-hmm. And almost really caring and nurturing.
Very, very.
And some of the people that I'm thinking of are just like the greatest, lovers, the greatest friends, because they want you to be happy, right? Like
Yeah.
their fuel comes from you beaming. When you are full, they're full. And yeah, so
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that.
I think the way I've spoken about echoism, I've made it sound like it's all really dark and all really negative. And the reason I focused on the negative is because some of the language around this whole topic is about, empathy,
Mm-hmm.
being an empath, which
Yep.
is just not, to my mind, that's not a thing. And I just don't think it is a thing. But having empathy is wonderful. But having empathy when you don't have any empathy for yourself
Mm.
is terrible.
Yeah.
Is so self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many wonderful qualities about being so warm, so caring, so empathic that you can look at someone else who's suffering and immediately feel yourself starting to cry. But when you don't go home and make yourself a decent meal because there isn't someone standing next to you,
Yes.
what use is that empathy? I mean, yeah, it's great for the other person, but as a parent or a co-parent, what about you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do we say to co-parents? And I don't want to just talk about moms here, but what do we say to co-parents who feel like they are genuinely in a dynamic where they're trying to work this out with someone who is a narcissist, and they're turning into or starting to feel the echoist kind of role because this person is so grand. It's so about them that I have to just take this space of it's fine. Whatever you want, we're going to just play by your rules in order to just get along. Is there any advice for that type of a dynamic?
A person who's kind of not like that normally,
Yes.
but they're like that because they're in that situation.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, I think if we're talking about someone who's really, really dominant and really pushy and will not hear the needs of the other person, I think, there's so much stuff online about good ways to handle that. And I think the ability to minimize your emotional responses has got to be the number one thing. The ability to just try and keep your feelings calm and pretty balanced and level has got to be the main thing, because I think in that dynamic, if the person is truly narcissistic, your emotional engagement, especially if it's negative in that situation, is only adding fuel to the fire. But I think people need support. You need support, because there's so much of that dynamic that's about reality being twisted and bent and pushed, and what you said yesterday is no longer true.
Right.
That's so crazy making stuff that if someone's in that environment, yes, of course, try to minimize your emotional responses just so that you're not feeding the energy. But I don't think it can be done well without support, really good support of family and friends who understand what you're going through and who can listen to all of your ranting and raving behind closed doors, and just not to sort of feed into that dynamic with the difficult person, because let's face it, those kind of characters are very, very difficult.
So, Lynn, as we're wrapping up, if you could talk a little bit about what treatment might look like. I know having a great support system and potentially, getting in therapy might be helpful. But what are some ways that an echoist can start to heal and get better?
Yeah, I think great question. I think what you've said, the family, the support, the friendships, the therapy is really important. An echoistic person is almost certainly experiencing some sort of complex trauma. There will be trauma there that will need some deeper work, but things people can do themselves are to start really experiencing at least some of their own needs, and getting really comfortable with the fact that if they don't know what they are, accepting that they don't know what they are, but actually starting to scope out some ideas, even if they are completely made up. Creativity is what builds personality. And so if someone doesn't know who they are, you really need to kind of play. It's a really good idea to start playing, being playful, being creative, doing stuff you've never done, taking up hobbies you've never done, arts or, music, drama, sports. Doing things that involve play is incredibly important to development of a strong feeling of connectedness to oneself. And it's really easy to minimize that, but I think play and fun are massively important. There are other things, simple things that people can do. So one of the things I've noticed during COVID is looking at your own face, funnily enough, in Zoom meetings. A lot of people were doing more and more of that. And although it can make people feel quite spaced out, if you spend time looking at yourself in a really warm, kind, supportive way, you're kind of reminding your unconscious mind that you're still here. And it sounds crazy, but there's lots of stuff out there on mirror meditation, mirror affirmation. It sounds very small, but little things like that on a regular basis can really help someone to start to feel like, yeah, I'm here, I'm real, I have some needs, I'm going to figure out what they are, but I'm going to take responsibility. I think it's very, very easy to think everything's going to be fine. And actually, nothing's going to change. Absolutely nothing's going to change if you don't deal with the thing that this relationship has been masking and covering over. In fact, if you get rid of one particularly abusive partner and you have a track record of dating other abusive partners, you're only going to replace this one with another one until that work is done. It'll just again and again and again.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for that. What comes to mind for me in closing is to tell single parents to really just embrace the process of learning themselves. It is so important to know who you are, and that leads to the stability of your child. It truly does. To put all your focus and energy into your children when you're in this space doesn't necessarily fill you up. It doesn't help you to learn who you are growing to become and who you ultimately should be. And it's okay, right? It's absolutely okay to be a single parent. We're not the first. We will not be the last. Some people are actually subscribing to being single parents. That's what they would prefer. So I just encourage people to really be okay with learning who they are. And I love that you said creativity starts with, or personality starts with creativity. Amazing, right? It's time to play. It's time to learn who you are. And it's all right to do that as a single parent who is trying to work toward co-parenting. I am certain I will have to explore this topic further with you because I feel like we just touched really the tip of the iceberg around echoism. And I want to make sure that our audience learns more about echoism. Where can they find you?
Well, I'm on TikTok, where I found
Yep.
you, or you found me on TikTok as the Echo Chamber on TikTok. But I also have a website, which is echoistrecovery.com. So anyone's welcome to have a look on there. And there's various services that I offer, therapy or teaching. If anyone wants teaching for their organization or for themselves, there aren't many therapists who know about echoism. So I'm trying to get the word out there as much as I can.
Yes. And we want to help you get the word out there. So make sure to check in with Lynn and learn more about echoism. Check out the Echo Chamber on TikTok. She's doing great stuff over there. And lastly, I just want to share with our Co-Parenting Confessions audience that it is 100% okay to be in the space that you're in today. We're working through what co-parenting is. You are not alone. But the key to co-parenting is accountability. You have to do the work on you. You cannot be focusing outward. You got to learn a little bit more about yourself, and don't forget to play. We learned that today. Have a good one, and we will talk with you soon on Co-Parenting Confessions.
Oh my God.
MBC. No relation to NBC.